I'm just trying to figure out if this audio is working now. Check, check, 1, 2, 3. Check, check, 1, 2, 3. Let me see. Okay, I need to get my mic stuff figured out. That's really frustrating that I was completely muted. I don't even know how that happened. I don't think my lav's working. I'm not sure why. So that's annoying. Okay. Check, check, 1, 2. Yeah. Okay, so my hell video got a lot more, honestly, views and interaction and just overall feedback than I expected or has ever happened for my channel before. And so I wanted to follow up with a few things because I got a lot of comments. And really, it kind of all I got a lot of the same type of comments, and so I wanted to go over some of what I thought the best comments were, or comments that encapsulated some pretty common pushback that my video had gotten. And so I'm gonna go over these one at a time and push back a little bit on them, or concede where I think that they did a good job in pushing back on me in my original video. So the first comment that I want to go over, it was from Charles Hazel Baker. And he essentially, I'm not going to read the full comment because it is very long and he gets into a lot of theology and scriptures and whatnot. But essentially, he advocates for the Seventh Day Adventist sort of model, which is annihilationism. And I got quite a few people saying that when you go to hell, if you don't get to heaven and you go to hell, that is not eternal conscious torment, but it's more so that it's the second death and your soul or your spirit is just completely burned up and you die, but like spiritual death. And there is decent, I would say that is a decent perspective. And I understand why some Christians and some people land there with that model because, it talks about the second death. It talks about, things like that in the scriptures. And, but I don't think it addresses some of the deeper concerns I have with hell. And that's like the moral side of things. Like, it is better, I would say, to just not exist than to be eternally consciously suffering, right? I think that's a better option, but it's still not a great option. And we still have issues like divine hiddenness. Like, we must believe in a very specific deity, the God of the Bible, to avoid hell. And yet he doesn't make himself abundantly known. And when the stakes are so high of literally, in this case, instead of like eternal conscious torment, it would be the soul being destroyed completely and dying a second time. We still have this ethical issue present, regardless of whether it's just a second death or whether it's an eternal conscious torment of God not showing himself, not making himself known. When the stakes are this high, I don't understand that why he wouldn't. And that just on its face doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I can concede that I think annihilationism is like a better version of hell than eternal conscious torment version. And I think that you even have like some decent scriptures that you could point to and be like, hey, this makes a lot of sense. I'll concede all that, but I don't think it gets to the more fundamental issue I have with hell, which is God demanding belief to be saved. And it doesn't matter if like you try to live a good life, if you try to help your fellow man, if you do all the right things, or if you do all the wrong things and you spend your life just being a piece of crap, but then at the end you profess Jesus and believe in God and boom, you can go to heaven. And I don't know, there seems to be something like deeply unethical about that on its face. And I can fully admit that this is just like a moral intuition I have. And you can say, well, that's just your opinion. And you're right, it is just my opinion, and I'm just a person on the internet putting my opinion out there. I think I have good reasons for my opinion, like everyone does, but on its face it just seems deeply unethical to me. It seems deeply immoral that God would, whether he destroys the soul or whether he sends you to eternal conscious torment, that he doesn't reveal himself. He doesn't make himself known. If he made himself known, and if like the evidence or the proof was undeniable that he existed, and then you still chose to reject him, that would make a lot more sense. I still wouldn't like it. I'd still have issues with it. We could still have a discussion about that, but it would make a hell of a lot more sense than any version of hell, be it annihilationism or eternal conscious torment. So I got a lot of people pointing to annihilationism. So I'm open to more discussions about that. I think it's a viable option as far as hell beliefs. And whenever I was in the faith, especially as a child, our church was pretty split. There was a good number of people that believed in more of an annihilationist perspective of hell, and then other people that believed in the eternal conscious torment. So I've been exposed like quite a bit to both these sort of models of what hell actually is. The second comment I'm going to read because it's a little more brief. It's from the user Life According to Shell. And they said, I'm sorry for anyone who's been traumatized by Christian theology. This is not the goal for many believers, and it sucks that some have gone through that. To give a quick answer, hell exists because we all deserve it. Our sins have become an unbearable weight to them. But God understands that hell is where everyone was headed, so he made the decision to sacrifice his son for you and I. But I say to you, be thankful that there is an option and a get-out-of-jail-free card. The knowledge of God is a gift. We must understand this. We live in a fallen world where humans pull further from God, and this is why few are saved, because not all want to be saved. A way to think about it is if God were to open the gates of hell, the people inside would come running out to close the door in his face. If you have any more questions, I'll discuss it. We actually went back and forth in the comments, and it was a good discussion. But I think the issue with this is that it is essentially kind of appealing to, she doesn't name it, but I think it's appealing to sort of this more C.S. Lewis model of hell, which, I mean, he didn't like fully invent it, but I think he, in The Great Divide, he like articulates it better than a lot of people do. And it's a very contemporary and modern understanding of what hell is. Whereas hell from the time of the early church, and then it like increasingly consolidated around this view of hell, and then like culminating it with Dante's Inferno in the medieval period, or of this place like a literal lake of fire with literal torment for all of eternity. Like this is a very, they understand this very literally. Whereas what C.S. Lewis and others, and she seems to be alluding to, is that hell is eternal separation from God. And it's not so much that God sends you to hell. It's that you almost send yourself to hell by rejecting God. And so God's just like giving you what you want. And that just being separated from God by its very nature is torturous, because he is the source of all things. And so I've heard this argument put in a number of different ways. I've read C.S. Lewis. I like C.S. Lewis. My main issue with this take is that it doesn't have a lot of historical backing. It's an opinion, and it's a much easier, I would say, read. It feels better. It feels better for us to say things like, God doesn't send people to hell. We send ourselves to hell by rejecting him. That feels a lot better to say when you're inside the faith. And I know this because this is the approach I took whenever I left the faith for a little while, when I was in my teenage years, or like angsty atheist period, and came back, and I took on like the Reformed Calvinist sort of version of Christianity. And this is the kind of argument I would make quite a bit. And I read like everything C.S. Lewis ever put out. And I would make these very arguments when I would talk to people about these subjects about, hell is essentially us rejecting God. And so we're choosing to go to hell and we're choosing to reject him. And I used that very line before, that if the gates of hell were thrown open, that people would slam it back in God's face. But it just doesn't have a lot of historical backing that Christians, as far as I know, and I've read quite a bit of the church fathers and early Christian writings, all the way up through Augustine, and I don't see that being a viewpoint until like very recently. This understanding of what hell was, yes, it's evolved through time, but this specific understanding of being eternal separation and just kind of giving people what they want, so like God not sending people to hell, but just kind of letting people do what they want, that seems to be a very modern interpretation. And so I'm very skeptical of contemporary interpretations when we have like 2,000 years of Christian history, and we have like rich history with lots of competing ideas early on. I mean, Christianity is much more varied than a lot of people give it credit for, especially early on. When Christians disagreed on like the nature of Christ, and whether like the very, very early church, whether the Gentiles were even like welcome in, or if this was just an extension of Judaism. Like, there's rich history in Christianity. And so I'm very, very suspicious of like dispensationalism, which is like Charles Darby, 19th century theology. And when we try to take a modern or contemporary version, C.S. Lewis also said that the doors of hell are locked from the inside. Yeah, he did. That was in The Great Divide, I think. I think it was in that one that he said. I haven't read C.S. Lewis in years, but I have read like nearly everything he ever wrote. I mean, I may miss like an essay or two, but for the most part. And so I totally forgot where I was going with this. I'm very skeptical of modern interpretations. I'm very skeptical of people approaching an old faith, a very ancient 2,000-year-old faith, and being like, me now in the 20th century, the 21st century, or whatever century, with 1,800 years or 1900 or 2,000 years of history, I'm going to tell you the true interpretation of how we should understand hell, or insert any doctrine. Of like, when we do that, I'm just like very skeptical of that. And I don't really buy it. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying there might not be like some decent contemporary interpretations of scripture, especially now. Like, well, would say the one caveat to this is that we have like the Dead Sea Scrolls now, which they didn't have up until the 1940s. And that kind of does change things, because you might have access to insights of the scriptures through older manuscripts that weren't previously available. So that would be the one caveat, I guess, to what I'm saying. But just generally speaking, I am very skeptical of just like modern contemporary interpretations of very old faith. So just on its face doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And so the next comment I got was from Martini Lemonade 9343. She said, logically, if you consider the possibility of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing God, you would have to concede that as humans, we don't even know the half of it. Our human perspective is flawed in itself, not to mention our personal one, which is limited. And then she says a bunch of other stuff that isn't super pertinent to this conversation about like how scripture is consistent, all these things. And I disagree with a bunch of it, but it's not really pertinent to hell. But at the end, she says, I think it's good that you're seeking. The Bible shows you that it cannot have been man-made. Where is it at? Oh, it is here. Okay, I'm sorry. I think it's good that you're seeking. I see your perspective, and I've been there, but it helps to see people as people and God as God. Look to God for an understanding of him, not humans, because the Bible already says every single one of us is a sinner deserving death. And so there's really two different points concerning hell kind of nested within this comment. And the first would be that she's appealing to like our fallen nature, maybe, or appealing to just our otherness. Like, God is, my face is getting all red. It's hot in this office. I'm in my office at work because my Wi-Fi at home just sucks so bad I can't live stream from there, and it's hot in here. Our AC doesn't work great in this building. Anyway, so she's appealing to basically humans are fallen, or humans are just like by our nature so different from God that we can't possibly hope to understand where he's coming from or like why he's doing what he's doing. And then her other point is that we deserve hell. that we're all deserving of it. And so to tackle these one at a time, I would say that concerning the first point, one of the most common apologetic approaches that I've seen, and I think is maybe a pretty strong one concerning the belief in God, is when you talk about like morality as being some sort of like a moral law set by God. And when you view it from that perspective, you quickly get into things like this concept of the Imago Dei, or the Imago Dei. Hi, Tom Davis. How you doing? And so what people often appeal to is that we are created in the image of likeness of God and the Imago Dei, and that we have been, what separates us from the animals and from other creatures is that we have like this awareness of things like I'm good too, just a little hot. It's hot in this office. So anyway, we have the Imago Dei, and that's what separates us from the animals. And so we can reason through morality, and we can actually approach God, and like we are separate from them, and it's God breathing into us that makes us separate from all the other creatures. But I think that you have an issue when you take that concept of the Imago Dei and then you try to say that humans are so broken, or we're just so other, that we can't even begin to understand what God's doing. So like, why even question hell? Because if I made it in his image and likeness, and if I have like something God-ish, not that I am God or anything, but I have something God-ish, something that God gave me to like reason through morality, which is a very common apologetic claim, then it seems to just not work. Like on its face, it doesn't work. On one hand, you say, humans are so broken and we can't even begin to understand God. But hey, we're made in his image and likeness, and this is why we have morality. This is why we can reason through things. This is why we're more than all the other animals. This is like the basis for a lot of these claims, and those just seem to clash. Like if we are so completely broken, and if we are so incapable of understanding God, then how are we made in his image? And I know people will say like it was the fall of the fall of man, and that's what broke us and made us to where we can't begin to understand God and his nature. But that at that point, it's just, I would say like divine hiddenness is another issue. Is if like the stakes are this high, and that the option is like believe in my free gift or go to hell, then like it doesn't make sense that God doesn't make himself more known. Like if he truly loves us, and if he truly cares about us, and he truly wants us to see the truth, why would he not make himself more like readily known? Why would he make us buy into and believe something that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense? And then if you have to believe and the gospel hasn't reached lots of people, like there's like the vast majority of mankind is just going to hell. And that just doesn't make sense and I know she's like appealing that, hey, you can't possibly understand. But if I'm supposed to have even a modicum of understanding given to me because I'm made in the image of God, that just seems to clash. And I could be wrong, and I'm open to critique, and I'm open to someone explaining, hey, this is actually why this is actually why you are wrong, and this is what you missed. Okay, that's fine. Like, I'm open to it. Bring it on. Let's go. And then this other section where she talks about humans deserving hell, she's getting at this idea of original sin, that man sinned, and this is what separates us from God, and it's really our fault. But I think the issue is if you take more of what most Christians, and I say most Christians because I know there are always outliers, there are always denominations that have slightly different understandings of like the nature of God and Christ and everything. But like the Christian consensus was influenced by like Hellenistic versions of like a prime mover that Greek philosophers spoke of. And so a lot of Christians would say that God is like by his nature just completely different. And she even kind of appeals to this in her comment. It's so very different from us that he's the first cause, the uncaused cause, all these things. He is the one that set up the system. He's the one that if you believe, a lot of Christians, the fundamentalists especially, believe that Genesis is literal. If you believe that like an omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful, all the things, if that creator, the prime mover, one that is so other than us, like set up the very system, that would lead to the fall, then I think it's still God's fault, right? Like that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me, that God would set up the systems and the scenario in such a way that, and he would know what happened and he would still set it up that way. And then somehow it's our fault. And then most people go to hell because of a system that he set up. And that seems also deeply unethical to me. That's just, and I'm using moral reasoning here to say that. And I know that from my viewpoint, having more of an atheistic perspective, a lot of people are going to, from a common thing that I've heard like Frank Turek and others say is that, like, well, what are you basing your morality on? Where are you approaching this from? I know that's what a lot of people say. Hold on. Deconstructed Christian here, yes. Make us understand because I want my life after death. I don't. True God knew what would happen. True God knew what would happen. Do I? Oh, if God knew what would happen, why do it? Like, right. If you're an omnipotent being who knows all things, well, me as like within this framework as a lowly human being, I have enough empathy and care that I would not set up a system in such a way that would lead to like so much death and mayhem and destruction. It just seems deeply wrong, right? And Frank Turek and people like him would be like, what are you basing your sense of morality on? And I think that like morality is most likely evolved through, we lived in small tribal bands and we had to get along to survive. And so we developed these senses of morality and right and wrong so that we wouldn't like kill ourselves as a race. So like I base it on like evolutionary drives most likely. And that's good enough for me to like not be a piece of crap serial killer. But I have concerns with people that they need a God to tell them what's right or wrong, generally speaking, to like not want to do awful things. And I think that morality tends to evolve over time. So anyway, that's getting off topic. True God knew. Okay. I totally agree. Plus, I've always wondered where hell actually is. Yeah, I mean, that's a good. I mean, I know that it's kind of within like pop culture, people are like, oh, it's at the center of the earth and this and that. And I think some people like actually do believe that even to this day. But what I've heard most commonly articulated is that hell is on the spiritual plane, which so it's like just it's like a different, not a different reality, but not in the physical realm. What that means exactly is up to, I guess, whoever to interpret, because I don't see any evidence for spiritual realms, but that's kind of what I've heard most often. So why do it? My bad. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by so why do it, or like why would God do it, or I'm not sure what you mean there. Okay, so to go to the last comment I pulled, I'm not even gonna try to read this user. Okay, it's Katrine. Oh, Katrine Ingrid. I can't say the last name. I think it's probably like Nordic or something, and I don't want to completely butcher someone's name. Oh yeah, you're good. You're good. Yeah, Tom Davis, you're good. You're good. So I'm gonna read her comment real quick. She said, "Hi, what about all these famous Christians like Mary Baxter and Bill Weiss, who've had visions of hell, which motivated them to write books about what they saw? And I mention them because they emphasize the importance of believing in Christ as Lord and Savior, repenting of sins, avoiding eternal punishment in hell." And she goes on to explain their kind of a little bit about like 23 Minutes of Hell, which is like super famous documentary and book and whatnot. Furthermore, many people claim they have seen hell, even atheists. They pop out all the time on YouTube, such as Wiccan Priest Dies, has shocking hell encounter, atheist meets Jesus, I died as a Christian, but porn sent me to hell. I don't know about that one. So what this, yeah, I appreciate it. It's my first live, and I don't think my audio is very good because my my lav isn't working. I got to figure it out on my end that I got to figure out my mic situation and get a better setup going, because right now I'm just having to use my computer speaker audio. So I hope it doesn't sound too crappy, but I will, by the time I do a live again, I'll get a better setup, more solidified, and I'll do some tests to make sure I don't, this doesn't happen again. But anyway, so her argument is essentially NDAs. It comes down to NDAs. And I think that this can be a powerful argument for hell to some people. Okay, audio work. Hey, if audio is fantastic, then we'll roll with that. Cool. NDAs work for a lot of people because it's emotionally powerful. That when you have this experience, or when you hear about people having that experience, that feels very real to us. And I don't want to discount anyone's lived experience, but I think the reality is that it seems very convincing within the American context, which is where most of these people are, like maybe European, but like mostly American context. But if you go to other cultures and other countries and other places, people have NDAs and other spiritual experiences, and they are usually heavily informed by the culture. And so if you go to like Islam predominant countries, then a lot of people are going to have NDAs, and they're going to see like the Prophet Muhammad, or, you know, an angel that tells them something about Islam or whatever. And then if you go to like a Hindu country, they're going to see like Krishna, or, you know, some other. I'm not super aware of a bunch of the Hindu gods. I'm actually studying Hinduism, but I don't know a whole lot. But anyway, my point is that if you go to these different cultures, a lot of times it seems a heavy correlation between what you see in these NDA experiences and what your culture says. And so it feels powerful in the moment whenever you're looking at all these documentaries and stuff, but I don't think it holds up when we like broaden the scope of what we're talking about, and we like take in. Good, I'm glad the audio doesn't completely suck, because I recorded like 20 minutes of just talking and absolutely no of and like it was all muted. I went back, and that's why I launched just an entirely new live stream. I screwed something up. So anyway, yeah, a lot of Hindus see Krishna. Yep, you just said it as I was typing. Yeah, so that's the thing, is that it seems like what essentially what I think it comes down to is the human brain. Like the human brain is very complex. It's very powerful. And we don't fully understand consciousness. I mean, we don't even actually come close to understanding consciousness. We don't understand how it even works, like really whatsoever. And so I think a lot of this is the brain. And again, I don't want to just like, I don't want to like shit on people's lived experiences. I don't want to shit on those things. But I think that more likely than not, what we're dealing with when people have NDAs and stuff is people's cultural experiences and the brain being flooded with dopamine and all the other you're dying drugs, or not drugs, but like the natural body responses. Your brain's being flooded with all these things. And so like your cultural context and what you know and your memories and everything influences what you see. And if you assume that, or if you go with that like sort of hypothesis for what's happening, that really neatly explains why Muslims would see Muhammad, you know, Hindus would see Krishna, Christians would see Jesus. And so, but then she also said that even atheists or Wiccans have these experiences. And so I obviously don't know what specific examples she's talking about, and I don't want to completely talk out of my ass here. But I would reckon to guess that a lot of these atheists were still like raised within a Christian context or raised within a Christian culture. And so if you're going through like a near-death experience and your brain's being flooded with all these, even if you like don't consciously believe in God anymore, like this is still the culture you came from. And you still saw the imagery as a child, especially living like America. I mean, it's everywhere. It's on TV. You see churches all over the place. And so if that's like sort of in you, like it makes sense that even an atheist would see Jesus and have like an experience. Now, I do think when we get into things like NDAs and stuff, I think we get into some really like interesting territory, because even though I would consider myself an atheist, I wouldn't consider myself a materialist. And so what I mean by that is I'm not rejecting materialism. I'm not saying materialism isn't true. I'm saying I'm not like fully convinced, and in my mind, the jury's still out. I'm really fascinated by things like idealism or even like soft forms of animism and, panpsychism, that like maybe the universe, like base reality, is stranger than we currently understand. And maybe it's not matter at the base of everything. And so there is a little crossover. I know we're talking about help, but there's a little crossover when you get into things like NDAs and experiences, or even like people using certain hallucinogenics and psychedelics and having similar experiences. And so I wonder, and this is just me like completely like just curious. Like I have no like definite claims. I'm not making any specific claims. I don't have a specific belief system about this. This is just curiosity on my end. If like if it's possible that the human mind is in those instances when the brain's being flooded with all the chemicals and whatnot, or if the person is using a psychedelic or whatever, if they're maybe accessing something that we don't fully understand that is maybe closer to like base reality, even more real than matter. Like again, I'm not going to make a truth claim as far as that goes, but I find it really interesting. I found it like very, very interesting. And so I've been, what's his name? Philip Goff. He like proposes all the panpsycho stuff. And so I've been really like, kind of doing a little bit more of a deep dive into some more of these other schools of thought. And so, and this isn't theism. Like this isn't even close to theism, but they are alternatives to just like hard materialism, that the universe is just sheerly material and consciousness is simply, a product of the material brain. And I'm just not fully convinced of that. I'm open to being convinced, and I'm not saying that like there's conscious life after the human body dies or the brain, brain death. I'm not saying that, but I'm also like not fully convinced of materialism. I think the jury's out, and it's like an area I want to continue to study as neuroscientists and the like, continue to do research in these fields. Let me see. Okay. Consciousness is kind of like what we refer to as magic, but as I understand it, it's just electricity and chemicals that overlay. Simplistic, of course. Yeah, so I mean that is like the more materialist kind of understanding of what consciousness is. But there's a reason why we have what's called the hard problem of consciousness. There's a reason why that's a thing, because we don't fully understand. And like people like Alex O'Connor, I've been going into this a lot more lately, and I watch him. I like his stuff a lot because he's an atheist, but he's really open to a lot of this stuff. I'm not like open to just believing whatever, but like just asking the question of like how do we get the actual experience? The example he uses a lot is how do we get the like experience of red? Because it seems like fundamentally you could like. The example he uses is, I think the thought experiment is like something like Mary's white room or something like that, where like you have a person named Mary that she's been raised inside a white room where everything's just black and white. She has no concept of color outside black and white. And then, but she reads everything she possibly can read about red. She knows red as a concept inside and outside. She knows everything there is to know about red. And then one day she walks out of the room and she's like a red flower or something. Has she learned anything new in that moment of seeing redness that she didn't already know? And what that thought experiment is supposed to illustrate is this idea of like experience itself seems to be like something fundamentally different. And so consciousness itself. And is that just a byproduct of like strictly material or like physical things? And I do think the jury's out on that. Like, I don't have a strong opinion one way or another. It's completely possible it is, but it's also possible it's not. I do find it really fascinating. I hope when and if I have a near-death experience, I see a Pegasus. Animism is one of the oldest metaphysical beliefs in the world. I find it fascinating, actually. Yeah. I did a video called "Is Animism True?" And I'm not actually arguing in the video about whether animism is true, but it is, and it does seem to be like pretty much the oldest. It seems to be the oldest belief that humans have across the world. Like if you go back far enough within any culture, people were animist, and that, that's Aboriginal cultures, African cultures, South American. I mean, any American culture, like indigenous American culture. And even like European cultures, like everyone was an animist. Yeah. In Africa. Yeah. I mean, there's still animists today. They're just animist cultures are few and far between. I'm not able to reply to Scott for some reason. I don't know. That may be something that was automatically in the settings. This is my first live stream and there might be some weird YouTube restrictions or something. Maybe, I'm not sure. I'll have to look into it. I don't know. I mean, I don't like see something to like edit lives. I'll have to do some research and see. Um, I don't know, but no, I am very interested in animism. And in that video, I took Pascal's wager and I flipped it because Pascal's wager is like, I will look into the I will look into the comments and see if there's something blocking it. But Pascal's wager, arguing that even if God isn't real, it's better just to believe he is, just in case. And like you're assuming like the Christian God and theism in general, all those things. But I said that I think it would be better if we lived like animism were true, whether it is or isn't. And it's not because it's like, oh, sit by the campfire, sing kumbaya, one with nature. But it's just like if you were to approach life, animals, people, even places, nature, everything, like it's something that had a soul or agency or purpose. If you were to approach life in general that way with like that attitude and that posture, then I think the world would be a much better place. Like, and so Pascal's wager argues that like, oh, you might, it's your get out of jail free card, escape hell by just believing in God, whether it's true or not. And I would say like, I think we'd have much better lives now if we lived like animism were true, whether it is or not. And so I'm not arguing that animism is true. I don't necessarily think it is. I think it's really fascinating. I think it's interesting that every single culture on every continent, like at one point, everyone was an animist. I think that's really fascinating. That seems to be like the base mode of what people assumed fundamental reality even was. I think that's really, really fascinating. And if, we continue to do study in the field of, fundamental reality or, neuroscience and stuff, and we circle back around to something that looks like idealism or even panpsychism, that the universe is fundamentally made of something more like mind or presence over materialism, that would be an interesting outcome that we almost in some ways kind of circled back to what like humans just intuited, like what we just intuitively assumed about nature. Like after all the science and everything, we kind of circle back around to something that looks familiar. Not that ancient people just like knew a bunch of stuff we didn't know. I'm not like trying to promote like conspiracies about ancient cultures or anything. But I think that would be really fascinating if people and humans just kind of intuitively maybe knew or kind of guessed or like had assumptions that turn out to be not exactly right, but partially right at least. So anyway, yeah, concerning hell, to get back, because I totally got sidetracked with animism because I find it so fascinating. So yeah, no, it's not embarrassing at all because animism is not well known. It's not a lot of people talk about it. And the people that do talk about it tend to be like the new age types, which I'm not hating on new age people. Like, people, it seems like belief and like faith and religion being one form of that is just like a very human thing. And so I try not to hate on that, except for in the case where like in certain forms like Christianity or Islam or whatever, where it has like real world effects that hurt people and like destroy cultures. Like I will push back on it in those cases, but it seems like very fundamentally human to like tell stories and to share myths and to believe things and try to figure out why. And so I find animism really, really, yes. I find animism so fascinating, and it is deeply tied to paganism. Absolutely. So, I mean, I think there's like overlap, if not like completely the same thing in some contexts. Like when like the Roman Catholics talked about like the Celtic pagans, that was just basically Celtic animism. Like the pagan beliefs that they held was essentially animism. And most of those beliefs, because that's my heritage is like Northern European, like the Germanic tribes, and then also Celts. And so that culture is completely lost to time because early Roman Catholicism really stamped out the Druid cultures and the animistic beliefs in Europe. Christianity just kind of destroyed all that really rich history, and you see resurgences nowadays with like pagans trying to sort of come together and try to reclaim some version that's like probably very different from what people actually used to believe in those regions, but still they try. And I think there's something kind of cool about that. You know, I don't think that necessarily makes it true, but there's an African philosopher named Akili Mbembe who's trying to bring back animism into the conversation and how ancient African spiritual beliefs can help bring some kind of peace to the world. I mean, see, I haven't heard of him. I'd have to go look him up. But I find that very fascinating too, because I think he may be right. And it's, like I said, it's less about like truth claims. Like I'm not saying animism is true. And I don't think that like in the way a lot of cultures meant it, like rocks literally have like spirits of some kind and like rivers and everything is inhabited in that way. I don't think that's like probably literally true. But I do think if we acted and if we approached life like it were true, the world would be a better place and it would be a lot more peaceful. If like you approach people and animals and nature and places with like a level of respect and like dignity, yeah, the world would be a hell of a lot better place. What religion wouldn't have a negative impact in the real world? Welcome, Daltonk 7. I don't think it's about one religion having a negative impact within itself. I think like I'm generally an atheist, like generally speaking, like the most like basic sense of that word, I'm an atheist, which I'm not convinced of theism. I'm an atheist in that sense. But I'm not like against all forms of belief. I'm not like anti-religion in that sense. I'm anti-dogma. And so what I think the dangerous part about Christianity or Islam or any other belief is when those beliefs become dogmatic to the point that curiosity and reason and all those things and like everyone just must conform to this preset worldview and curiosity is like stamped out. I think that's dangerous. And then when that is scaled to society, like we're seeing now with like the rise of Christian nationalism, I think that's very dangerous because you have like the surety of religion and the dogma of religion beginning to be imposed on like a state level. And so for me, that's the danger. The danger is dogma, and dogma is what I'm against. I don't hate or even dislike religious people. I hate what dogma does to people. Now, religions tend to be prone to dogma. And so religion in general can be very dangerous in that way. But I'm not one of those atheists. It's just like purely anti-religion, period, and destroy it all sucks and it all needs to go. And that's kind of like what the new atheists tended to promote a little bit more. I mean, some of them had a bit more nuance. And over time, like Sam Harris has softened up a bit on some things, but the new atheists kind of argued that way. And I just disagree that I don't think religion is stupid. I think it's deeply human. There's a reason why it pops up independently across the world. There's a reason why humans tell myths and create stories and try to figure out what's going on. It's like deeply human and it's not stupid. The issue is dogma. The issue is whenever we become so convinced of any one thing that we believe it, we're not willing to question, and then when we try to impose our will upon others. So I don't think it's any one religion. Right now in America, I think Christianity specifically like fundamentalism, like fundamental Christian nationalism, like there's a bunch of overlapping like Christian Zionism, Christian nationalism, fundamentalism. They all kind of like share space and there's a lot of overlap there. I think that's like very dangerous. And I think that's doing the most damage like here. But then if you go to the Middle East, I mean, fundamentalist Islam is very dangerous. Fundamentalist Islam, I mean, has been stamping on people's rights, mostly women's rights, for hundreds of years, like centuries and centuries. So I mean, I think it just depends on how dogmatic a religion has become and when it starts to trample on human rights. Now, what religion wouldn't have a negative impact on the world? I mean, any religion could have a negative impact on the world depending on whether it became dogmatic and controlling or not. So like, I think, like I've been advocating in this stream, I think animism would likely be, in my opinion, it's like the best bet where you just like approach everything like it matters. It has agency, even a spirit, so to speak. And I'm using that word like spirit loosely. Again, I'm not saying that I literally believe this. I just think it would be better and cause less harm. It would make us better if we just not that we just pretend like it's true, but if we just approach everything and everyone and every place like it matters, I think that would be the best version. Now, that's not necessarily a religion, but it's a more of like a way of approaching the world. I don't think things are way more alive in this world. Oh, I think things are way more alive in this world than we realize, even hell to some degree. To bring it back to the topic, yeah, we've gotten kind of off topic. That's fine. I mean, I don't mind talking about whatever. It's just there just seemed to be a lot of conversation going on around hell, and a lot of people like strongly disagreeing. And there was like some really good, genuine conversations. I mean, within every comment section, there's just going to be like trolls and people coming in bad faith, and then people just like posting entire giant blocks of scripture and scripture verses that don't want to like actually have a conversation. And it's like, okay, whatever. But there was like some genuinely good topic, like good conversations, and there people like coming at each other, and like I wasn't even involved in all of them. I was reading some that it was like entire exchanges between people that disagreed, but they're like being respectful to one another and stuff. And I love that. I love to see that. So that's why I wanted to do a live stream and like talk about it further. But I honestly don't care. I honestly don't care if we go more of in the other direction, just talk about religion in general or anything else. Do you think religion stifles human development? Oy. Yes and no. No. So I take a materialist. Hold on just a second. Yeah, I agree about dogma. Perhaps I'm going to get back to your question in just a second. I agree about dogma. Perhaps it isn't wrong that Islamic religion wants women to wear headdresses, but that it forces them to. I think animism can overlap with deism. Sure, animism can overlap with deism. Animism doesn't make any truth claims. And yeah, I don't have a problem with people wanting to wear headscarves or whatever. That's not the point. The point is whenever like a religion or a state or markets or anything or anyone is enforcing their will like onto other people in such a way, and like for like no reason. Like it's different if we like have like don't no murder laws, right? Or like don't murder people. That's a good law to have. That's a good thing to enforce. But like wear a headdress, no. Like come on. Do you think religion stifles human development? Yes and no. So I think that historically religion was very useful. I think that there's a reason why religion pop up independently across the entire world. And I think the reason is that, like, especially early on, religions brought like social cohesion. Religions, they gave people shared myths. And like these are things that a society needs to like come together and survive. And so in that sense, I think religious it didn't stifle, it did the opposite. It like helped humanity come together in many instances. But like when I speak about humanity, I'm not speaking about the whole of humanity. These are like isolated, like these people that believe in this God within this specific culture, they came together here. But then oftentimes that would like result in like them going against other tribes because they believe that the land was given to them by God, which is exactly what I think is happening in the Old Testament of the Bible. Is you have like a Middle Eastern war god that is Yahweh, that becomes known as the God of the Bible and Christianity today. But it was really essentially like this tribal war god that was like, go and destroy these people and take their land. And right, that's stifling human development. That's just killing people for and justifying it through religion. But I think that like underneath the horrible things of religion does powerful things. And Britt Hartley from No Nonsense Spirituality, she puts this so great. Like if y'all don't know about her, you should absolutely go check her out, because she like does this for a living and has studied this way more than I have, and she's just amazing. She talks about, she's an atheist, but she talks about all the good of religion, like and the sort of like underneath the hood stuff. And so I would say, just me personally, today, do I think religion is stifling human development? Yes, at this point. I think it's absolutely stifling human development. I think if like we stop fighting religious wars, and if we got away from like the capitalist system we have right now, where like capital gains is the organizing principle around our society, that like the sky's the limit about what humanity could achieve. And I think it's really like greed and then like religious wars that are holding us back. But then I can say that now but I'm also like privileged to have 21st century technology and like stable food chains and like all the things that modern life brings me. And so I say that from like great privilege. Whereas if I were to transport myself back 10,000 years ago to a person, to being a person living in one of these, you know, early agricultural societies, religion makes complete sense in that context. I still think there was like harms and stuff, but it makes sense to like be socially cohesive, you know? Tom Davis. We would take better care of our world with animism. However, I'm not dogmatic about man-made global. I don't want to get you flagged, so I'll not say more about man-made global. I'm honestly not sure what you mean. I'm not really too worried about being flagged. So I mean, just like don't put anything too crazy. But I mean, you can elaborate at least a little bit. I'm not sure exactly what you mean. You watch Brit? Yeah, she's very cool. I think she does a really, really good job of articulating her views. For now, LMAO. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. That kind of that's kind of basically how I feel too. Thanks for your answer. Yeah, absolutely. I just with these kind of topics, I try to take a nuanced approach because it's really, really easy to get like tribal and like essentially I'm like anti-tribalism as much as possible. Or like my tribe is like humanity, like people, like humans in general is my tribe. And so I think that like whether that's Christians or even atheists or these different communities, we tend to like close ranks, and we have our tribe and we have our set sort of beliefs and whatever, and then we like close ourselves off to like wonder and like these sort of, I won't say spiritual, but like these transcendent things. And I think that can be dangerous. I think that can be dangerous. And I think that it can close us off to experiencing life fully. So, like, I try to be nuanced and recognize like the good and the bad of any given thing, whether that is is religion, which like has more bad than good at this point, I think. But I can still recognize that like at one point it made complete sense. It had its purpose. It's a social technology, as Britt says. You know, it makes sense. That Tom Davis, global warming. What about global warming? I mean, I think it's happening. And I think that it's really, really scary when Christians say things like, yeah, Jesus is coming back, so who cares? There's like a sort of shirking off of human responsibility when you can just throw everything off on God and be like, God's got to figure out the end of the world certainly won't happen because Jesus is coming back. That's dangerous. That scares me because these people that say that sort of thing are in government making decisions that affect all of our lives and affect the entire planet. And whenever you have like this just callous disregard for something that affects us all and will have like downstream effects for future generations and stuff, it's scary. Deism and agnostic theism is the best thing for God. I'm not entirely I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. If you could clarify, that would help. Our stable food chain. Sorry. Our stable food chain? What am I missing? So global warming is what I intended to write, but I thought it might get you flagged on YouTube. I don't think global warming would get me flagged on YouTube. Um, we've gotten way off topic, but I mean, who cares? I don't care. I mean, I started it talking about hell, and we can get back to hell if everyone's interested. But I mean, I find all these topics really, really interesting. So yeah. I don't know. The messages are going away for Daltonk 7. So I'm not sure what's happening there. They're like deleting. Same here. But yeah, to I guess to get back to hell, I don't think any one of these I don't think any one of these replies or comments, or like, and I got a lot of different comments, and a lot of them that were like, I roughly could kind of characterize as, okay, these were all like the annihilationist arguments, these were all the like eternal separation and you have a misunderstanding of hell arguments. I don't think any one of them really gets like the fundamental thing I was even arguing for in the original video, and that was that hell isn't some univocal doctrine taught across the entire Bible. It's just not. And Christians that say that have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to get to that place, you know? Oh yeah, yeah. No, I love talking about this stuff. I talk about politics a lot on this channel, but I love the religious side of things too. And for me, within like the current, especially American context, it's almost impossible to not like cross streams, so to speak, when you're talking about religion and politics. They just go hand in hand at this point with the rise of a lot of what we're seeing in the U.S. You know, it just is what it is at this point. So when I talk about religion or politics, I mean, they're just kind of, it's all over the place. They're just, it's tangled, way too tangled to separate out completely. So yeah, I mean, I like talking about them all. But yeah, no, hell, you know, the oldest parts of the Bible, there wasn't a clear heaven or hell. There was like a Sheol, which was like a broader Mesopotamian idea of the afterlife, you know, which is like this place of nothingness where there's no agency or action anymore, and we just sort of we go to, and you know, like I said in the original video with the Epic of Gilgamesh, you see that him wrestling with this, and then this concept of hell just develops over time, brought on by things like the Babylonian exile. And I get it, like I feel for these people in their time and in their place having to deal with this, where like they get taken up out of the land, taken to a foreign land, and it's like, I thought God made me all these promises, God made us all these promises, and then suddenly, like, what happened? And so like their theology changed out of desperation and out of what they were going through. And then it's like a very human thing that makes complete sense. So when I'm critiquing these doctrines, when I'm saying, oh, they don't make sense and they change over time, it's not like a cut down against people, because people are living with whatever condition that life has handed them, you know, and their theology changes because it kind of has to in those circumstances. And so we get things like a judgment because they deserve, you know, they deserve the promises God made, and it's not happening in this life. So boom, it gets offloaded to the afterlife, and suddenly that just feels a lot better to these populations, because okay, God's fulfilling his promise in the afterlife. Now there will be a judgment, and the wicked will be done away with, and the righteous will inherit. Okay, boom, my promise is fulfilled now, even though it wasn't, and it failed. And so the theology changes, and then you get things like the resurrection, this bodily resurrection, and that you see that reflected in the New Testament. That was an emerging sort of idea and concept that, you know, the Sadducees and the Pharisees disagreed on. The Sadducees tended to have this more, I would say, old school, old world Mesopotamian idea of the afterlife, probably something like Sheol. You know, they probably held on to more of those older beliefs, whereas the Pharisees tended to embrace this idea of the resurrection from the dead and all those things. And like within the context, it makes complete sense. You know, during Jesus's time, the Romans have occupied, and the nation of Israel once again feels like it has been failed by God. And so, you know, it makes complete sense to me that we have things like a resurrection pop up, and we have things like a judgment pop up after that. But they're just like absent from the oldest texts we have from the Hebrew Bible. You know, it really does. It makes complete sense to me. And people feel very strongly about this because they're raised in it. I mean, when you're taught this sort of thing from the time you're a little, like a kid, like a baby, of course you believe it. Like, of course you believe it strongly. And of course, like, it sticks with you. These are like sticky topics because, like, in eternity and like fiery torment, that's horrifying. It's like absolutely terrifying, especially when you've been told this since you were a kid. And so like to let go of that and approach the Bible from more of like a historical perspective, and to look at it and be like, well, yeah, it's terrifying, but is that what the Bible's even saying? And I don't think the Bible's consistently saying that at all. because I don't think the Bible's consistent. It's like a cobbled together collection of texts written over like 1,000 years by who knows how many hands. Like, of course it's not going to be consistent or make complete sense. And that's not to throw shade at anybody. That's not to try to hurt anybody's feelings or to say that the Bible sucks or it's awful. That's just, I think that's historically what we're dealing with when we approach the Bible. And so whatever doctrine we approach, whether it's hell or anything else, but we have to approach it with that understanding that this is different people from a totally different cultural context trying to understand the world, and some of it's poetry and some of it's ancient myth, and some of it they're taking ancient texts and incorporating what's already ancient, hundreds of years old text into their rewriting. You have all kinds of stuff going on inside the Bible. And for the modern Christian in the 21st century to just approach it and collapse all that nuance and complexity down into like, well, the Bible says this, is like, no, it actually doesn't. Like, please, like, have a little bit more respect for everyone's intelligence. Like, that's just not what's happening here. Okay, I feel like hell is a man-made concept that evolved over many centuries from a dark, quiet place to a place of fiery torment. Learning this is what made me be able to question Christianity. I completely agree. That's exactly what it is. It evolved over the course of millennia, but yeah, centuries, from that dark, quiet place, that concept of Sheol, the afterlife of like, and then it was like down in the earth was their idea, because they have no idea that the center of the earth is like molten lava at this point. So for them, it was like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, they talked about like eating like clay because there was nothing else to eat, and they lived in like the area of Mesopotamia had like this like kind of almost like caliche kind of clay, and so like their version of the afterlife is you're just like down in the pit, like underneath the earth, and a lot of them they had like a flat Earth model understanding of reality. And so they're down in the pit, just like eating clay, not able to do anything else. And boom, that's your afterlife for all of eternity. And that absolutely developed over time into like that fiery torment. Because once you have things like judgment, then what happens to the people that get judged and found guilty, right? Boom, we have torment. That makes complete sense. One thing that bothers me about some of the world or realm where heaven and hell may be is that it divides the world in two. It's like people focus their whole lives based on that belief instead of living on the earth in this world. Yeah. I will say that like even like animistic cultures kind of had this view of like the other world, which is like the spirit world. And that's not like unique to Christianity, this idea of like another realm or another world of where like reality being divided. That is like a pretty common feature of a lot of different religions. And so I think that's fascinating within itself, that pops up like so much seemingly independently. That's interesting to me. But when it detracts from the life you have now and living that life, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree that like I would separate out the wonder of possibility of like, what if there are other realms that we aren't privy to and we don't fully understand, and that seems to just be like possible. And again, I'm not making any claim that it certainly does exist, but it seems possible. But to separate that out from like, we should live in the here and now because we know we have this life. This is the only one we know we have for certain. So like, why would I not make the absolute most of this and make my relationships matter and make my life mean something and enjoy it? And like that just, yes, absolutely. I would separate those out. Tonk 7, it is certainly not compatible with the idea that God is loving or merciful. Tom, hell means God's love is staunchly conditional. Yeah, that's what it seems to me, and that's a good way to put it, is that hell makes God's love seem conditional. And so when I was a Calvinist, or like more of a Reformed, because like, okay, I don't know who's familiar with like Calvinism, but it is basically they believe that like God has predestined people towards hell or heaven. And the way we would frame it as Calvinists, and the way I even said it at times, and now I like cringe hearing myself say these things, but at the time I would say that like everyone deserves hell. Yeah, predestination. Everyone deserves hell, and then God just chooses to pass over those that he doesn't want to save, and then his elect, or those who he's like predetermined and pre-selected, he will choose to save. Like that was the viewpoint. And there's some good scriptures that you could go to and be like, it kind of seems like that's what's going on. But it's very conditional. And like it seems to fly in the face of this idea of a God that sort of transcends human understanding and human capacity. And then you get like this very like small feeling God that's love isn't like big enough for everyone, that can't redeem everyone. And like there's a base level human instinct where like it feels good, I think, for a lot of us. And I can even admit this myself. It feels good, like this idea of hell. Like, yeah, some people deserve hell. I mean, like, maybe not eternal conscious torment, but torment of some kind, like the very most despicable of humans. Like that gut reaction, that knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people have, like, yeah, there's people out there that deserve hell. I mean, come on, Jeffrey Epstein and people that went on that, like those kind of people that do those sorts of things, like children and stuff. Like, yeah, okay. And so I get why something like hell developed when you see just the vast amount of just pain and misery in the world, and you want it to make sense. You want the pain to have meaning and to like be avenged. You want to avenge all the pain and the suffering, and you don't want the bad guys to get away with it. And so we develop concepts of the afterlife where the good people, you know, they get saved, and the bad people, they go to hell where they deserve. And I understand that like gut human instinct, but you're right, it doesn't seem to really make sense with this idea of an all-loving God. Yeah, do you deserve hell for simply not being a Christian though? No, I don't think you do. Like, and what does it even mean to be a Christian? Because Christians haven't always even agreed on what it means to be a Christian in the first place. And what I mean by that is that Christian doctrine developed over time and it evolved over time. And so, like, this idea of like, you say the sinner's prayer and you accept Jesus into your heart, and then you're born again, like in the modern, like sort of contemporary American context, that idea is like very, very foreign to like early Christianity and to, I'd say, like most of the scriptures. You see, like throughout the Bible, you see a lot more of like sort of this more ritualistic approach to like joining the covenant of God, whether that be like for the Israelites being circumcised and you join into the family of God, and right, or like, and then up until what was it, the 1500s? I think that was the 15 or 1600s. I think it was maybe 16 when the first Anabaptists split off during the Reformation, and that was like the believers' baptism group, where they believe that no, you have to be an adult and you have to accept Jesus into your heart, and then you accept Jesus into your heart, and then you get baptized. Whereas like Christians for all of Christian history before that, they baptized their babies into the faith because it was like a covenant that they were entering. And so, do you deserve hell for not being a Christian? What do you even mean by being a Christian? As a person, a Christian that was like baptized into the faith as a baby that entered into the covenant through their parents' actions? Or is it like this more modern concept of becoming a Christian where you have to like literally accept Jesus into your heart and say the sinner's prayer and you're saved? Like, I don't think that the Bible is even clear on what it means to be a Christian. The Bible's not clear on that. Like, what does it actually mean to be saved? And what does that even look like? Like, what's the process? And I just don't think the Bible is very clear, and I don't think the Bible is very consistent. And I think that you have people like within the book of James that's commonly accredited to, that would have been James, the brother of Jesus, I believe. You know, he has a very different understanding of what it means to be like a follower of Christ than someone like Paul. You know, James is, and Christians will like do a lot of work and twist themselves in knots to try to make these things fit together, and they don't really, I don't think. But, you know, James has more of like almost like a workspace sort of like, hey, faith without works is dead. If you're professing Jesus and like you're not actually like doing the Christian thing, you're not a Christian. Whereas Paul's like, you know, Paul gives the commands, hey, don't do this, do that. You know, he's giving the commandments, but he seems to be much more focused on like the grace aspect. And so it's like, what does it even mean to be a Christian, like historically? And like I said, I just don't think it's like entirely clear, and I don't think it's entirely consistent. And I think that the apostles and the early church fathers disagreed on a lot of these points. I mean, you had groups like the Gnostics and others that kind of their knowledge of them has gotten stamped out over time. But you have Christians with entirely different frameworks of understanding what Christ was, what Christ came to do. I mean, the Gnostics believed that the God of the Old Testament was the demiurge, which was evil. And that's how they explained a lot of like the moral and ethical issues within the Old Testament. And then Jesus came to set us free from like the demiurge. So then, and they're within this Christian framework, which is like a very early Christian framework, their view of like what Christ even was, like who he was, and his relationship to like the Old Testament God is completely different than Orthodoxy. Completely different. So like, what does it even mean to be a Christian? Yeah, James was all about the works, not faith. Yeah, he seemed to be. I mean, it seemed to be. I'm surprised they kept the book of James in the canon during the Nicene Creed, because it definitely goes against Paul's version. Yeah, I mean, I think it does. And like, I hear a lot of Christians, and I used to say this myself as a Christian, is that, well, it doesn't actually conflict. They're sort of highlighting two different sides of the faith. Paul's like emphasizing one thing, and then James emphasizing the other. And so they don't actually, they're not saying different things, or they're saying different things, but they're not preaching a different gospel or anything like that. It's just they're emphasizing different things depending on the cultural context and the church that they're dealing with. And I just don't think that holds up. I think James like fundamentally is teaching something different than Paul at the end of the day. And I am also surprised. Now, I don't think the canon of Scripture wasn't solidified during the Nicene Council. That was when they came together and came up with, like you mentioned, the Nicene Creed. But the canon, I don't think they talked about the canon of the Nicene Creed. I'm pretty sure, unless I'm just completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure they didn't even deal with the canon. Yeah. So from here, I'll be listening, but I have to drive somewhere. Have fun, y'all. See you next time. Hey, listen, I appreciate you stopping by. It means a lot. This is my very first live, so I do appreciate you. You be safe wherever you're going. And I'll be shutting down the live here in the next few minutes because I got to get home. I got a 4-month-old kid and a wife that's been watching her all day, so I got to get off here in just a second. Jellifer Wibbly. I'm honestly not sure who you're referencing, so I'm not sure. Yeah, you're right. It was about the New Testament books they kept, I believe. Sorry. Within the Nicene, yeah, it wasn't really about establishing that is like a really common thing people say, that the Nicene, the Council of Nicaea was about the establishing the canon of Scripture. But from what I've researched and what I remember reading on it, I don't think there was like a specific council where they just like, this is the canon of Scripture. It kind of like formulated over the first couple hundred years of Christianity. And then you had a lot of like Christian churches that like, there was the Gospel of Thomas, like there was more of like a Gnostic book. Then you had like that, what was it called? The Shepherd of Hermas. And there was like a number of the Apocalypse of Peter. You had a number of these books that early Christians kind of had in with their like canons. And you have to understand like the 66 books that Protestant Christians have now, because like we have this Protestant Bible is different from like the Ethiopian Bible and then the Catholic Bible. Christians didn't have the full Bible. A lot of Christians, especially Jewish Christians, they would have had like the Old Testament or like the Torah at least. And then they would have had like maybe some of Paul's writings or, maybe one of the Gospels, and other Christians would have had a different gospel. And then maybe like James's, and then we also got to remember that like most scholars agree that the New Testament was still being written like well into the 2nd century AD. So this idea that a lot of Christians like to say that, the book of Revelation was the last one written by, John the Apostle on the island of Patmos. I mean, that's like just like not true, according to most scholars who I've read. It seems that like the people, because they knew that like Paul or James or John were authoritative voices, and so they would go and write some of these later books, and then like say they were writing and that they were so and so, Paul or James, but they weren't actually, and they did this because they're like trying to establish their version of Christianity, and so you had like a lot of divergence like very early on in Christianity. You had a whole lot of divergence, and so what do we mean by Christianity? What do we mean by the Bible? What do we, because like these topics are like very complex and they're very nuanced, and like the truth is there's like no easy answer, there's no simple answer. You just kind of have to wade through centuries of interpretation, centuries of competing ideas. And yeah, some version of orthodoxy kind of emerged in like the 3rd and 4th century, uh, while the Catholic Church was, what we now understand to be the Roman Catholic Church, was consolidating. Like that seemed to happen. But I think what became known as orthodoxy stamped out like a lot of early versions of Christianity that had like a lot of different versions of the Bible, that had different texts of scripture that they relied on. Christian history is not nearly so neat and tidy as a lot of Christians believe and even say it is. I just don't think that historically holds up. But yeah, the Nicene Creed was established during the Council of Nicaea, and so yeah, it's an interesting one. But anyway, to bring it back to hell real quick, I don't buy it. I think it evolved over time. I don't think any one of the points that people were bringing up really kind of derails my larger argument, even though I think some people like have good points in the sense that like, yeah, annihilationism is like a decent doctrine, and I understand why some Christians believe that if they believe the Bible in that way. I can like step into their shoes and be like, yeah, okay, I get it. That doesn't mean that I, not being a Christian now, by any one of them, and I wasn't convinced by any of the comments, but I really did appreciate that comment section, at least most of it, and a lot of what I saw, a lot of good comments and pushback from, in a lot of in respectful ways. I saw multiple threads where you had Christians debating agnostics or atheists, but there was like this mutual respect in most cases, and I really I like to see that. I think that in these topics, when we discuss these, they can be divisive topics, but if we like approach it with like humility and respect for one another, and we can disagree, and we can disagree voraciously, but if we can approach it with a level of humility and respect for one another, it'll yield much better outcomes than just being like angry or tribalistic about things. So yeah. Yeah, no, it's good to see. So especially online, I mean, online spaces are just like so toxic. You have people that just rage bait, and then others that troll and stuff. And I don't want my channel to be that kind of a place. I want to try to avoid that at all costs. Getting to where, and that's why I deleted some comments. I'll let most comments go. Like, people are allowed to have their opinions. I believe in free speech. But if you're like obviously just trolling and just being like that just to like get a reaction out of people, it's like, I don't want my channel to be that kind of a place. But anyway, listen, I'm going to go ahead and close it down. I think I appreciate everyone that stopped by and all the comments and all the input. It was really nice chatting with you all this evening, and we went into animism and the human psyche a little bit, and into like the fundamental nature of reality, and we touched on quite a bit more than just hell. But that's cool, totally cool with me. I enjoy that, and I think I'll try to do lives. I'm not sure about a specific schedule yet, but I'm going to start incorporating them in on top of the essay material. So yeah, I'm going to try to work those in and make them more of a regular thing. So I do appreciate everyone's time. Yeah, see you next time. All right, thanks guys. Y'all have a good one.